competitive man who always felt that he had the best version of any Rossini score, and Verdi and a lot of the others, but especially Rossini. And he worked with someone named Alberto Zedda, who was a wonderful man in Pesaro, where Rossini was from. And later, early in the 80s, they launched the Rossini Festival along with Claudio Botto and other directors. But in the just few minutes you mentioned Federico Bonestata, Jose Carreras, and many others. It was a time, and you were in a place where you could meet all these people, and they would, I don't get the sense, you correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't work for them, they didn't work for you.
Correct.
Take that away.
In New York, there were a group of us, in our early 20s. Some of us wanted to be stage directors. Some of us wanted to be, managers, talent managers. I, on the other hand, wanted to be, I had an opera workshop at Brown, and the university said, great, okay, here's $700, make the opera. And it was a task. And I thought, okay, how do we make this work? Providence has a great Italian community. And so also living in Rhode Island was the wonderful late mezzo-soprano or contralto, I should say, Jean Madera, and who I happened to meet. And I had told her what I wanted to do with the opera workshop, and she said, I'll come and speak on your behalf. So I got one of the ladies, an Italian lady on the east side, to open up her home and have a coffee. And so we had a coffee, and I brought 2 or 3 artists from New York, from Juilliard, who also sang. And as a result, we announced when the first production would be, and we passed the hat. And we raised a nice amount of money, not everything, but it was a start. And as a result, the Brown University Development Office had sent some people to see what I was doing, and they recommended that I be engaged in development for Brown. And I thought, my friends want to be stage directors. There are tons of people who want to be stage directors. But for opera, you need to know how to raise money and get people involved and make them feel part of the family. So I said, I'm going to do it because I feel this will serve me well when the career grows. And so I did that for a year and a half. And then I went to Oxford, where I studied Spanish, Italian opera, 17th century, and had access to the libraries and archives in London. So I was able to continue doing musicological research. And it happened that after the Siege of Corinth, after 3 years, 2.5 years, and anticipating the Siege of Corinth, opening here in Met, it was always raining, it seemed, and I got pleurisy. So the head of Philips Records and his wife and their 2 daughters lodged me in their attic apartment, and for 3 weeks, I was incommunicado. I got well, and I came to New York to see the siege, and I wrote 2 letters looking for an opera company. One was Houston Grand Opera, and it was a young company, and needless to say, they needed money. So I was hired, and I stayed there for 14 years, And I went from development director to assistant director of the company to associate director of the company. And in that job, was able to advise David Gockley, who was the general director, of operas that I think we should consider, and casts. In the period, we were also building a new opera house, which opened in 1987. And I said, what do you want to open with? And he said, I think Aida. So I said, who are you thinking for Aida? And he said, I don't know, who do you think? And I said, I'll speak to Morella, who has only sung Aida in Salzburg, and see if she'll come, and we'll get Domingo, and Pietruszka, and Pixel, Yarov, and Pizzi, and PBS agreed to televise it.
So Pizzi, Pierluigi Pizzi,
Yes.
is the director, wonderful director. We don't know him enough in America, but still alive at a very, very old age, and still working.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Aida Ballet for this production was wonderful, very unlike most. And thank God. And so we had, Franny came and agreed to do it. So it was the second and last time she sang Aida. But it reached the New York Times and was well received. And they talked about the fact that Morella was not being seen at the Metropolitan that much. And what else can I do?
Well, Jack, what I want to do is jump in and have Igor play number one. By the way, our friend Julian is in Italy. Igor is substituting tonight. Because you as a boy were able to put on TV and see things that we don't necessarily see now. For example, illustration number one when you're ready. Jack, you were able to turn on television as a boy and see Ed Sullivan and have Renata Tebaldi and Leontine Price and all of these singers on Richard Tucker very often. We just heard Tebaldi and Tucker. You were able to turn on the radio every Saturday and hear these people. People think that back then we didn't have as much access to opera because if we didn't go, we didn't have it, but it was part of the national broadcasting conversation, and it was not sort of limited and restricted. I know because I've asked you about this, that Tebaldi more than Callas was the one that captured you. If you don't know this, Callas was born here in Manhattan, who was sort of the queen of La Scala, and Tebaldi was born in Marche, but grew up in Emilia-Romagna, and was the queen here in New York. And I was finding it very interesting that they occupied each other's country. And Callas, everyone thought she was Italian. She was a New Yorker. Or they thought she was Greek. She lived in Greece, but she was a New Yorker. Tebaldi very much the Italian. What was it like at that time to hear a voice like that live?
It inspired me to go into opera. You know, the two great singers with squillo and a dramatic thrust and big voices that would envelop you in the house. And with personalities that were so large that it was so exciting that you want to go back and see it again. And with Tebaldi, she, you know, the applause were endless. Today, you give one curtain call, and that's it. And back then, they kept coming out, and then there used to be a fire curtain at the Met.
At the old bed.
At the old Met, well, even the new Met.
Yeah.
And it was a white asbestos curtain. And when that came down, it was the time that people were to go home. But with Tivaldi and Nielsen and Rieseneck and Sutherland, people would continue clapping and carrying on. And so they would stop this asbestos curtain, and the lights would go up again, and they'd come out through the curtain, and Tivaldi would come to the very edge of the stage, where at the new Met, you could actually touch people. And she reached out and would congratulate people, hear what they thought, and it was so, how would you say, it satisfied a lot of people that they had this moment, maybe a second, with Tivaldi, or with Sutherland, or with whomever, that it generated people to come back to see other operas that these people were in, or to see Manon Lescaut again, and there was this tremendous love and outpouring from the audience. And I think what, we were saying that all you need is a great opera, great singers, great orchestra, and the rest, you're in heaven. Maybe today it's not like that, for whatever reason. They also believed in what they were doing. And I'm not sure, they didn't sing it. Is the word incarnate?
They incarnated, yeah.
So it was an exciting period.
Yeah. And that leads to I'll call it a problem that we have sometimes today. When and I'm sure Jack introduced younger people to, or not younger people to opera, I never want to say, I heard Sutherland, Frady, Horn, Price, you pick the names, because that can be intimidating. And there are great singers today. And I want that if someone comes along now and falls in love with a particular soprano, tenor, baritone, whatever, that person be the one, that singer, be the one who opens the door to opera for the next generation of audiences. I'm always optimistic that I'll hear someone new that I think is terrific. That's why I keep going back to the opera, because I know many of these works. But also, let's say an opera I love, Andrea Chenier, I always want to hear new people doing the roles to see what they bring to it. So we live with opera through our whole life, also because we change. So certain operas that maybe don't affect us when we're younger affect us a lot right now. The next clip we're going to play encompasses all of that at once, because it stars Morella Brady and Piero Capuccilli at La Scala. Jack, you'll tell us after if you were there. It's when I was a student working at La Scala, and I worked on this production, and that's where I met Morella Brady and got to know her, and that changed my life. So when 3 years later I met Jack, we discovered, among many things we had in common, was his love for Morella Brady. Let's play it now, Igor, if you can, number 2, and then we'll talk about Verdi Simone Boccanegra. This is video.
Alcun la non vedesti. E Giovanna si nomava, lei che infatti a terra pir. E l'effigie non somiglia a questa. Ma quale sangue
Jack, did you attend those performances?
Unfortunately, I got stuck in a snowstorm in Chamonix, and I arranged a ride for the Ringraziamento.
Yeah.
And, but I did catch it with very much the same cast in Vienna, at the Vienna State Opera.
Okay. Was it the same production?
Same production
Okay.
by Strahler, yes.
So what's particular about that production, there are a few steps, there's scenery, there's lighting. It was not about big, fancy scenery. It was about stage direction. And you had a father and a daughter reuniting, discovering one another. It's a complicated story, but he discovers this is his long-lost daughter, and everything changes. And that's what this is a recognition of. Piero Capuccilli was a singer who was loved in Italy, loved somewhat in Europe, not all that well known here, but basically was the go-to baritone in the late 70s of La Scala. He died too young, but he was really something.
Oh,
And he was the anchor of all these productions. Even though Marilla Frady played the daughter, Amelia Maria, depending what you call her, was wonderful, obviously, but the title character was Simone Boccanegra with Piero Cappuccini. And it brings me to a question, Jack. It's a big question, but you can answer as you wish. Critics. The story of Simone Boccanegra, if you want, is very complicated to make no sense. If you want. But if you really want to understand, because to me, Verdi never made errors, so he knew what he was doing. And the other night I was talking, I did it with Mark Armadiato, the conductor, and he asked me what my favorite Verdi opera is, and I said there are two really, Don Carlo and Simone Boccanegra, and he had just conducted it in Vienna right now. And we were talking about that opera and how it's misunderstood in part because critics don't seem to buy the story. I find that that's their shortcoming, that they cannot buy the story. But Jack, over decades, you've had to work with many artists and maybe with critics and writers as well, who, because critic in Europe is a different thing. It could be a musical authority, not someone who's saying it's good or it's not good. In America, it's more about writing a review. Is it worth my time and money to go to this opera? Artist Kranick, the famous head of Lyric Opera in Chicago for many years, when I asked her about critics, she said, "Dearie, you have to love them." And what she meant was, there's no way of getting around the fact that we have critics. But Jack, I'm sure you've known many, you've worked with some, you've also worked with artists who have borne the brunt of negative reviews. This so-and-so should not do the role anymore, she's too heavy, she's too old, whatever. Mr. So-and-so is not dashing. How do you, number one, approach the concept of criticism? And number two, how do you talk to one of your singers when they get a negative review, specifically if it's about their appearance rather than their singing?
I've been fortunate that my singers, not that I'm looking for them, I mean looking at them for their figures, but they are reasonably proportionate, shall we say. In terms of a bad review, whatever it is, I speak to them and we can see what the critic was saying and how they respond, how they feel about their own performance. And, you know, sometimes we've come to the conclusion that the critic did not understand. You know, other times in this business, people are a bit catty. And there's again, I'm sorry I keep bringing the name of Franny up, but she was away from the Met for a good 7 years with all her European and La Scala commitments. And she came back and she did Don Carlo with Domingo. And after the fifth act aria, the applause went on and on and on. And typically, as they do in Italy and maybe some other places in Europe, not England, I think there's a school. They put their head down, and then when it starts to die down, they put their head up, they smile, and then when it keeps on going, they put their arms up, and the place goes wild. Franny did this at the first performance of Don Carlo at the Met. And Harriet Johnson of the Post called her a casalinga type singer. And, you know, we talked about it, and I just said, here, people hold the figure. They don't acknowledge the audience. And, but, you know, in the circumstance that she'd been away for 7 years and sang so magnificently, and the public went wild, for whatever reason, they were so happy to see her again. It went on and on and on. And she did what she does in Italy. And, but don't pay attention to that. Just maintain the character. So when she came and sang Michaela, when she was 53, 54, and she was coming from San Francisco with, where she did Bohème with Pavarotti, and they televised it. And the Met had said, if we can get Morella for even 2 performances, please let us know. So she happened to be flying San Francisco. She's coming to New York for a couple of days, and then going on to Milan. And I called the Met and I said, well, she's actually here for these 2 performances, one being the radio broadcast. And they said, please invite her. And I invited her, and she said, I'm a grandmother. Do they want a grandmother singing Michaela? So she said, ask Jimmy. So I spoke to Jonathan Friend, who made the offer, and I said, she said, does Jimmy want a grandmother?
James Levine.
And the next day, Jonathan called back and said, Jimmy doesn't want a grandmother, he wants Morella Frankie. And so it was still like a year away. She hadn't sung the role in God knows how long. And so we had concerts in the States, aria concerts in the States and in Japan, and we programmed it. So she had like maybe 5 times to sing the aria again. And so Domingo was conducting, and Lucchetti was the tenor, Sam Raimi was the escamillo, and just before the 3rd act, I saw her and I said, don't bow. So she said, I know. So she came out, and the applause went on for, I've timed it, it's like 2 minutes, 14 seconds, and which is forever in the theater. And people were in the boxes, banging on the sides of the boxes and carrying on. And it was a great satisfaction that she'd be willing to risk the Gaella, which she sang in the 60s at the Met, to come back. But because of her technique and seriousness in restudying and getting the sound that she wanted, that she just won people's hearts. So that was really good.
That was her first role when she was about 19 in Modena, and she was married to someone before her longtime husband, and they had a child. They named the daughter Michaela because of that.
And so Michaela has always been something dear to her, but she thought she had grown out of it. So, indeed not. But that led to a couple more engagements, Manon Lescaut, and then a series of bohèmes with Pavarotti and Kleiber. And again, it was a huge success for everybody. And Bruce Crawford,
Then general manager,
took us out to dinner, and he said, okay, let's plan the coming years. And so we set up a series of operas, and she came back almost every season, and with success. And so this was good, and this is Morella now. Jim Levine said to Morella, I'm so glad you're coming back. And, I want to apologize that, everything in recent years has been given to Renata Scofield. And she said, please, First of all, I'm the godmother of her daughter. Second of all, in the first year we were all together here, we would play cards together. And she said, while Renato was busy at the Met, I was busy at La Scala. And we both had our successes. So I don't feel that whatsoever. And so she came back and did Adriana, she did Onegin, and this was, reestablishing her. And then towards the very end.
Well, we're gonna get to the very end later.
Oh, no. This was.
Umbrella.
No, Fedora.
So Fedora and then something else, but we're saving that one.
Mm-hmm. So the Met administration or the artistic staff, not Levine, and not Joe Volpe at that point, she wanted to do Adriana. And I said, oh, what a terrible opera, it's a second-rate opera. When you have great singers, it works. So the next thing she wanted to do was Fedora, which Met had not done since the 1930s. And as a result, again, this chorus of, second-rate opera, no. And my point was, if you have two singers that believe in the story, that live the artists' lives in the opera, you win people over. And we had Franny and Domingo. And it was so popular, I said to Joe Volpe, we got to document this. And he said, but we don't have funds. So for my development years, I found a donor who would pay for the telecast. And that's when the opera came back in April, May of that season. And it was televised. And thank God we have it for posterity.
I'd like to move to another artist. We were talking about Don Carlo. In that cast back in '83 was Domingo, Brady, Louis Quilico, Nicola Diallo, I believe, and Grace Bunbury. And the great thing about the opera Don Carlo, among many things, you need 5 or 6 fantastic singers, or you don't do it. And that year the Met had 5 or 6 fantastic singers, with Levine conducting. And my personal awakening to opera, I'd been to opera before seeing Grace Bunbury, but I saw her for the first time when I was 11 in 1967. And that kind of electrified my attention. Before it was just sort of, it was nice. But seeing Grace Bunbury in an opera, which was Orpheus Eurydice, and she was terrific. She wore a very famous costume. It was all silver, and the silver boots and the silver cape, and she was Orpheus. And years later, I asked her about that costume, and she said, I looked like Muhammad Ali going into a fight. And she was sort of a Muhammad Ali going into a fight approach. She was a great, great artist. She had a great amount of temperament. She was never boring on stage or off stage. And Jack, many people loved her and appreciated her, but Jack got her on many levels, I think. So I'd like us to hear Grace Bunbury in Don Carlo, or Don Fatale. So Igor number 3, if you would. What was it about Grace Bunbury? What did she have?
She had guts.
And hold the mic here.
She had guts.
Yeah.
And she had a technique that was solid. And she ultimately moved to Vienna, where I would spend a lot of time. And she said to me, because she retired, she sang Clitemnestra and she retired. And then she said to me, you know, I think I retired too early. Would you manage me? Now she had to be close to 60 by this point, 65. And I said, I'll manage you, but in something that you have not spent a lot of time doing, which is Liederabend, which she began with her teacher, Lotte Lehmann. And I said, Lehmann turns 100 in a year and a half. Let's do a series of recitals, where you sing the repertory that Lehmann would sing and that you learned from her. And we did that. Paris, London, Vienna, Munich, and we ended up in Alice Tilly Hall. And she was a magnificent voice. And so, you know, it was like giving an extension to a great singer, which, you know, gives me great pleasure. Because God knows she gave me pleasure in the early days and continued. And Grace basically was singing in public, not all the time, but would do galas and benefits until she was 86. And I was with some people, like one of the people from Covent Garden who used to engage her, and they would all say, her timbre is exactly the same. Maybe a little bit shorter on the top, but God, it was this type of singer that could keep it going and kept it interesting. And she always told a story. So that was Grace, and then she was flying here, had a cerebral hemorrhage on the plane, and unfortunately lived the rest of her life in a hospital. So,
I could write a book just about my experiences with Grace Bunbury. I do want to point out that she was James Levine's very first singer. When he came to conduct at the Met in 1973, she was the Tosca. And Grace was a mezzo-soprano, but did soprano repertory. Famously, she did a video of herself as Aida and Amneris together in the judgment scene. I'm sorry, not just before the judgment scene, in Act 2, where basically she argued with herself. And she had a great flair, but she could only have that flair because she could deliver the goods musically and dramatically. I remember one time she was doing a concert at Carnegie Hall and came out on stage with a great gown, and she would bring a lot of wardrobe and change after every song group practically. But she swept out on the stage and took the applause, and then looked at the piano, and the cover was sort of closed, not all the way closed, but low. And she put her hands on her hips and turned to the audience and said, and she went over and took the pole and held it up, and so that the sound would come out. In other words, she did not need the music dampened down for her. She could sing out fully. And then she sang the music fully. And that flair, with that sense of drama, but then also communication, you're in good hands tonight, because I'm going to give you a great show. She always gave a great show, never boring. I'll save some of it for the book, but she could be very capricious and very funny, but delivered always on the stage. She, by the way, she studied more or less at the same time as Marilyn Horne at the Music Academy of the West. And was the first black opera singer to sing in Bayreuth, to sing Wagner. And she was known as the Black Venus in Tannhäuser in 1961. So she already was a star in 1961. And she, as Jack said, just kept singing wonderfully. There was never a sense of decline. But this is an example of what I was talking about with Jack. We found something new for her to do, rather than bring back the greatest hits of decades before. There's another artist among many who Jack discovered and shepherded her career. I had her here one night a number of years ago, Tara Eroth, who's an Irish mezzo-soprano. We're going to hear her in a moment, but Jack, how did you come across Tara Eroth?
I was in Munich, and somebody said, come to the studio. There's a young lady there that we believe has a lot of talent and a future. And I went, and what I loved is her eyes would sparkle, and she was alive, and she told a story. And I said, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to be a full-fledged opera singer, with a determination that convinced me that I want to work with her. And so, until I retired, we did work. And as of today, that one thing that we were aiming for was that she had a high mezzo. And she said, I want to sing the Zwischen roles.
Zwischen, between in German.
And so she would start off her career as Cherubino, but now she sings Susanna. And she's been singing Fiordiligi and Elvira. And then most recently, Italia in the Citricar, in the Clemenza di Quito. So it's been a joy to watch her develop and have great international career. Unfortunately, she came to the Met. She was going to do Cenerentola, which is her signature role, and which we're going to see here. And COVID happened. And the day of the dress rehearsal, they made the decision to close the theater that night. So she never got to sing Cenerentola. And she's not sung at the Met, but she's gotten around to other major houses. So,
what's particular about this performance, every year in Amsterdam, in the summer, they have an outdoor concert. Now in New York, it will be in Central Park, but in Amsterdam, you take your little boat in a canal, in the Prinsengracht, which is one of the canals of Amsterdam, and all the boats gather together, and you have a singer on the stage. And the stage is created on the canal. So you're going to see an audience in their boats. That's what they are, dressed very casually. I went to that concert one year with my mom, who was then about 90, and we went in a sailboat, and it was Thomas Hampson performing. And my mother decided at a certain point to stand up and walk to another boat because she wanted to talk to someone. So on the news in the Dutch media was, I cannot speak Dutch, vroege vrouw, in other words, old woman walks from one boat to the next during concert. And I said to my mother, old woman? And my mother said, I'm not an old woman, you're gonna have to call the media and tell her. I said, Mom, you're 90. But she attracted a lot of attention. Thomas Hampson acknowledged her. But this concert setting is so wonderful that people become very involved. And the Dutch are a great audience. They produce great singers, but not as many as we know. And so therefore, this is one of the great artistic events every year, and it's an honor to be the featured singer. So Tara Eroth was that in 2010. So Igor, if you please, number 5.
Britse mezzosopran Tara Eracht en Jean-Yves Thibaudet aan de piano.
Okay. So, Igor, setup number 7. We're not going to have time to play it all, but I want to get to another whole topic because there's so many topics you and I can cover.
Or do you want to jump to the last one?
Well, we will then go to the last one, but
It's up to you.
I want to talk a little bit about another aspect of your life's work, which is to say that opera exists not only in the theaters, but it exists in broadcasting. And Jack has worked very closely with Brian Large, who to me is the greatest director of opera films and movies and videos. And I was fortunate when I was at the Met to watch Brian working all the time, creating many magnificent videos that were different from everybody else. Because if you look now at HDs and other opera videos, it's like watching a sports event that the camera jumps back and forth all around. And Brian Large's productions on video and on film, to me, were always about the music. And if during an opera performance you were to go to hear a performance, your eyes would not be jumping back and forth all the time. You'd be focusing on the person singing. And what Brian Large's films do is they make it an opera experience even if you're watching on your television or in a movie theater. So I got to watch Brian do the entire ring cycle of Wagner, James Levine conducting, Otto Schenk and Luther Schneider-Siebsen production. I recommend that to you if you're Wagner phobic, because it's the most wonderful way to learn the ring cycle, and you can shut it off or go back to what you want. But he did something very revolutionary in the scene that we'll probably see a little bit of now. Wotan's farewell at the end of Die Walküre and the Valkyries to Brunhilde as he is going to lay her down to sleep. Before that, directors did not put cameras on the stage to capture what we call a reaction shot. They would have it in the auditorium. So in effect, you'd be watching on TV what the audience was watching. But Brian Large inserted one camera very discreetly to capture Hildegard Behrens as Brunhilde reacting to James Morris, who's singing his famous farewell to his daughter. So, Igor, let's watch some of it. We don't have time for all, because I definitely want us to hear the last selection we have. And then we'll talk about, Jack, about television, opera, video, and all that. because we're gonna, after we hear Marilla Frady in her last big performance at the Met, I think there's nothing else to say. So if there's anything else, Jack, you want to add now, please do.
No, thank you very much.
And I will see you all in 2027 in a newly redone auditorium. Continue to go to the opera, support opera wherever you live. Opera needs audiences more than ever, and there are always the next great singer. Tara Roth began very young, and someone like Jack discovered her. But there are still these singers today, but we have to support them. So with that, I happen to be at this performance, I wouldn't miss it, of Marilla Frady at the Met Gala in 1991. Watch how her colleagues react to Marilla Frady, and you'll understand the stature as an artist, but also the qualities that she had that no one else has ever had. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Igor, for wonderful work today. And here we go, Marilla Frady, 1991 at the Metropolitan Opera.
And now that exquisite artist who celebrated her own silver anniversary at the Met just this spring. Tonight she will sing Adriana Lecouvrer's beautiful Io son l'umile ancella, Mirella Freni.